Now, I've always been very sort of resistant to and suspicious of the kind of neuroscience mania that pervades our world. And I sometimes think of it, this is not an original thought in any way, as a kind of modern version of phrenology. I think what's important about Friston's approach is that it's a dynamic rather than a static neuroscience. Now, the basis of it is, I apologize for a little bit of physics here, but you're all familiar, either theoretically or certainly practically, with the second law of thermodynamics. And the second law of thermodynamics states that if you make a cup of coffee in the morning and then the telephone rings and you go away and you chat for a quarter of an hour, when you come back, that cup of coffee is never going to be hotter than when you left it. It's always going to be cooler. And the second law of thermodynamics states that there is a tendency towards disorder, or entropy as it's known in physics, and that tendency is irreversible. Now, there is one exception to the second law of thermodynamics, and this was invented by, or discovered by one of the founders of quantum physics, Erwin Schrödinger. He wrote a wonderful book in 1944 called What is Life? And his answer to that is, life is what he calls neg entropy. In other words, unlike the cup of coffee that cools and you leave it in the corner of the room, life remains at the same temperature. It confounds the second law of thermodynamics. It creates order, and it, as it were, works against disorder and chaos. And it's relevant to psychoanalysis in all kinds of ways, but if we think about the death instinct, which I've always found rather a difficult concept psychoanalytically, if you think about it in entropy terms, what that says is the death instinct is that we are all ultimately tending towards disorder, but our life, our liveliness, pushes us in the other direction and maintains life within us. Now, how does any of this relate to psychotherapy? Well, going back to, sorry, next slide. I keep forgetting to say next slide, but I'm assuming that, Claudia, you're keeping up with me. So the slide now is the DNA of psychotherapy. So what do we mean by energy? Well, energy comes from the Greek, and the Greek word ergos, which means work. Now, work, in a sense, is the opposite to chaos. Work is kind of directed energy. And what Carl Friston, the contemporary UCL-based Wellcome Trust neuroscientist, realized was it's not just life itself, it's not just the body which resists neg entropy, which is all the time fighting chaos and disorder and creating order. The same applies to the brain. And he said the brain is being bombarded by sensation from the outside in terms of our sensory organs, and from within the sensory organs in the gut and in the proprioceptive system. And the brain has to bind this energy, has to make sense of it, has to structure it. So we're already into this dialectic, as it were, between free energy, which is necessary but, as it were, dangerous, and structure, which binds and directs and controls that energy. So the mind, in Carl Friston's principle, top-down binds incoming bottom-up energy. And what the mind has to do is to deal all the time with stimuli that it doesn't know really what they are and what to do about them. And it has to increase its precision. Next slide, please. Now, don't worry about this. Stay on your roller coaster, because I'm going to illustrate this in a way that I think will make sense in a couple of slides. Another of the founding fathers of the free energy principle is the Reverend Bayes, and some of you may have heard of Bayesian probability. But the basic idea that Bayes had was that we need to develop a mathematics which helps us to work out what is probable. Now, this is a two Ronnies joke, and the man comes in to the shop, the kind of shop that no longer exists, and says he wants 4 candles. And that's an ambiguous stimulus. Does he want 4 candles or 4 handles? And so the brain doesn't know what to make of this. And we're all the time having, as it were, to deal with these ambiguous stimuli. And what the Reverend Bayes said was, I didn't actually put it this way, the future's not ours to tell. Next slide, please, the Reverend Thomas Bayes. But we're all the time trying to make probabilistic predictions about the future based on our prior knowledge. The only thing we know about the future is what we have learned from experience up to that moment. But we're all the time, as it were, learning and revising our predictions about the future in the light of experience.